folks, and welcome to another BTN podcast. I'm going to stop doing, because the past few podcasts I've been doing, and Craig is on the other side of the table, like that, just like a wee stuttered.
Yeah, it's very annoying.
It is very annoying. So, even the fact I brought it up
is
it really annoying.
You've annoyed me already.
So, as part of Science Month...
You said we weren't going to mention...
Well, I think... Yeah.
Okay, let's start mentioning it, just out the blue. Okay, Science Month. Yay, science.
Well, I think we mentioned it in the last one as well. Aye.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes we mention it, sometimes we don't. This time we're mentioning it.
It's part of the thing that happens, like when it's a project that started midway through doing conversations. But that's fine. So as part of this Science Month project we have on the go right now, we have on the line David Kirk. How are you doing, David?
I'm grand. How's it going?
Excellent. Oh, very good, very good. So, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So I'm probably not the best. Well, I'm probably not the best person for Science Month. I'm not a scientist anymore. I was, but now I've got into just talking about science an awful lot, which is ideal for a podcast probably, but I'm not sure what else. So I studied science back in my native Ireland and as an undergrad, and then I did a PhD in Finland, because that was the beauty of the European Union then. You could go anywhere, do anything. And then I got a job in Nottingham, so that's where I am now. I'm in Nottingham in the UK. And I transitioned from working for a startup that genetically engineered bacteria as therapeutics into communications, because I also did communications for the company. In a small company, you have to do a million different things. And one of my million different things, besides genetic engineering and research and development, was communications. And it turns out I had a bit of a knack for it and went full-time, self-employed communications science guy in 2019, right before COVID, which should have really, destroyed a startup business. But turns out people wanted science writers to talk about a global pandemic, so that was fantastic.
Definitely an upside to being a scientist at this point.
Definitely.
Silver for such a tragic thing and such a horrible thing, it's been very good for science in that a lot of money obviously is poured into it, which meant a lot of research and development and a lot of great technology being accelerated towards patients who need it most. And it is absolutely fantastic to see, because everybody benefits.
Yeah.
It's also been good for conspiracy theorists as well, though. That's kind of a downside.
Oh, I love it though. I love a good conspiracy theory. I like to out the conspiracy theorists. You ever seen that meme where it's like, oh no, we didn't land on the moon, and then it's like, you still believe in the moon? out conspiracy them every time.
So me and Stephen used to be conspiracy theorists quite heavily. Like we were totally into 9/11. My personal one was the moon landing conspiracy theory. So
that seemed to be like your mastermind, chosen subject for some reason.
I was better at arguing about 9/11 because I'd read more about that. But the moon landing was that was my thing. I enjoyed that more. That was just more fun. It was outside of Earth. It was this weird thing that nobody really spoke about, but I felt like I had the knowledge of the world in my hands. Of course, I was wrong.
It's dangerous, right?
But it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what conspiracy theories are all about.
It's the foundation of science, though, in a way. You're asking questions, and you're learning an awful lot. And obviously, the conclusion you draw is way off, I think, with some conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
But not always. I mean, sometimes there is a genuine conspiracy there. I'm not going to knock conspiracy theorizing in general. If you're asking questions and you're trying to uncover the truth, there's a very fine line between conspiracy theorists and scientists.
Yeah. Because I think as well, some of those guys can be steered in the right direction. Sure. They are just asking questions, and you could sort of pick up on what they're trying to think about, and then steer them in that right direction. Some of them are unhelpable. As we know, David Icke is completely out of the realm of help at this point.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine David Icke coming on a podcast and somebody's like, actually, Bill, that wouldn't work. And then he's like, oh, damn.
That's a good point.
That's a great point.
With the lizard people. That may be a bit off.
Yes.
Love lizard people, man. So the reason we got you on was your genetic engineering background. Now, I have to have a bit of a, I think preamble is the right word here. This is so hard to find someone in that area because there's so many different words that mean you specialise in so many different things.
Yeah.
And I could not pinpoint the word for the person that just makes stuff genetic.
See, you're even struggling right here.
I'm even struggling with this. I couldn't find somebody who just genetically engineered things. That seemed to be very hard to work out.
Yeah, because there's so much scope for like what you could actually do.
So what would you say is the term for that, if there is one?
I think you raise probably the most contentious point in the field of this science at the moment. It's not, we don't talk about technology at conferences anymore. We argue over terminology of what to call ourselves.
Mm.
And it basically just ends into childish bickering over the whole thing, because it comes down to, well, what does the person giving us money want to call it? And you've got this, the science minister who prefers one term over another, so then everything gets papered over. I think the term used at the moment is engineering biology, and that took over from synthetic biology maybe about 10 years ago, which had been the preferred term, and it's still quite prominent now online. So engineering biology is not the mainstream phrase used at the moment, but it's certainly the one we want to aim towards, because it's also less frightening than the term synthetic biology. Synthetic implies it's unnatural and it's weird, and it's not. Genetic engineering is it's a tool that underpins this field of engineering biology. So you'll probably be hearing people talk about, I'm a synthetic biologist or an engineering biologist. That might be the term. I know Edinburgh has a big genome foundry up there. And also I think outside of Glasgow, there's BioCity and MediCity. So there's an awful lot of scientists up your neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the bigger things is, like Craig mentioned earlier on, that you're a synthetic biologist. And I'd imagine a lot of people hear that term and they think, this is like the start off to Spider-Man. This is... Do you get that a lot? Like, people think you're like the evil guy from like a horror film. Like, you're like implanting things into people to, like, I don't know, give sheep human hands. Crazy shit.
That would be weird, actually. No, you just give me a great mental image of that. Oh, God.
Actually, a great idea.
I really scared myself earlier because I suggested to Craig that, I think it was on your status, that bat tarantulas, because that is the biggest, scariest image that I could think of. Mm.
Oh, God, someone's going to listen to this and probably, like, just taking notes and be like, tarantulas. Yeah, we could do this. A museum or a zoo of the damned, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to write that down because that's good.
Please do not write down bat tarantulas.
See, the thing that scares me is that there was news today that, I think it was today, that scientists managed to revive micro something from 100 million years ago. I think it was microorganisms.
Yeah.
I saw something today. Now, I'm not sure if it was the same thing, but I saw something from the oldest DNA uncovered from a mammoth. It was a new mammoth species that they found. But I know I've definitely seen the stuff like DNA found from like ice cores in Siberia, and they've found bacteria, and they've been able to revive the bacteria. That's creepy, because what if there was a disease that, 100,000 years ago or a million years ago that our immune systems are completely not adapted for?
Yeah.
And these bacteria just come back to life. I mean, that's the other problem with climate change. But going back to your question, not so much. People don't think we're, these kind of crazy biologists who can do all that. I think people do know the limits of the technology. You can't just make these things. But there have been super scary stories, I guess, in the media. Like, do you remember a couple of years ago, there was the Chinese scientist who CRISPR'd a couple of, I can't believe I used it as a verb, CRISPR'd a couple of babies essentially to try and make them immune to HIV by deleting a small part of a gene that the HIV virus binds to.
Jesus.
I think he succeeded with one. He was put under house arrest. I mean, it was. I think he's been in house arrest since then. It's completely illegal to genetically engineer humans in every country.
But he's successful.
And the technology is not ready. So we're a long way off from Spider-Man or anything like that. So I do think people are aware.
Here's the thing. That sounds like it's not. I need to really watch.
You do, yeah.
I really need to watch what I'm saying here. But the intentions of that seem to be good.
I think with most science it is, aye.
Yeah, but that's the worrying thing, isn't it? Like if you're able to.
When good. Yeah.
Sorry,
I think you're completely right. The ethics behind it is huge, and that is why in this kind of the newer field of kind of synthetic biology and engineering biology, a big part of educating the next generation of biologists is teaching them responsible research and the ethics behind it. So you've got philosophy as part of the structured program for learning these things, because there's too many ethical implications. You might want to genetically engineer a human to be, to be immune to HIV. Fine. But you don't know the implications of that. I mean, if you then start selling that technology and it becomes only the rich people get to do that or the poor, and then you get, this big dichotomy in class. And then how far does it go? If you find, the gene for intelligence and you want everybody to be intelligent, then only people who can afford the treatment get to be smart. Is that fair? Of course not. So there's a lot of ethical implications involved, but it's not going to happen to humans ever. I don't think it's ever going to be ethically approved.
Yeah, I mean, I shared the thing. It was a year anniversary of Richard Dawkins being Richard Dawkins and saying something on Twitter that he wasn't fully prepared to back up, because it's Twitter. He's only got a certain amount of characters, and Richard Dawkins is kind of known for not being very good at social media, and so he said something about eugenics, which kind of, it always seems to make him look so much worse than he actually means it, just because he's not able to explain it properly. Yeah. And so he sort of put his foot in his mouth a wee bit about eugenics. And it was kind of interesting to see the two different responses to that. One, freaking out because eugenics, you hear that and you think of Nazis a lot of the time. But on the other side, you have sperm donators and stuff where they're choosing sperm based on genetic attributes, and that's a form of eugenics which already exists. So there's two sides to that problem, I feel.
Yeah. Well, the technology at the moment kind of says, like, engineering a genome is like all of those genes that make you who you are, all of these little instructions. That's still very difficult at the moment, and that was widely publicized then when that doctor changed the HIV receptor gene in those two children because it didn't work in one of them properly. It edited one of the two copies of the gene, but not the other one, which meant they were still susceptible to the disease. Right. Also, it could have effects in other parts, other genes in there, because the technology is not 100% accurate. And I think if you're going to do anything with humans, you got to be 100% before you do it. You can't just take a punt and hope for the best. But at the moment, what the technology can let us do is read the DNA. So if you have like a little ball of cells, that little embryonic stage, you can take one of them out without doing any damage to the embryo, doing a whole sequence, read the entire instructions of the genome, everything that's going to make that person who it is, and basically say, yeah, I'll take it, or no, I won't. And there's people doing this now who can afford that kind of technology. They get a few embryos on a plate. They get pay a scientific company to read all of the genomes, pick the best one of the batch, and that's the one that gets implanted into the womb.
That's so crazy.
I know.
I can't comprehend how you take DNA out of a thing.
Well, I was going to ask because I think we asked this question before to
the virologist.
The virologist, and we assume, and I'm imagining this is in your head, you're going into something that's like a bit of skin, and you sort of cut parts off that need to be removed to replace them with something else from something else. And it seems like absolutely like terribly complicated.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing, is it?
It's not actually like that.
Yeah, it's not actually like that at all. Like, could you explain in the most basic of terms, like what you actually do when you're going into edit
genes?
You get a tiny pair of scissors and you cut the DNA. That is it in its simplest terms. With some of the mechanisms, CRISPR is the big one people are talking about now because it's so easy to use. So, and that is literally like a molecular scissors. It recognizes, it's like a scissors that can read, if you know what I mean. It can read your DNA up to a point, sees the point that it recognizes, cuts into it, and says, that's it, done, slice. And then you typically, if you're going to add something to the genome, or if you're going to remove, you kind of put in a piece of DNA that partially matches the genome around the sides of the cut site. So your own DNA repair mechanisms, our DNA breaks all the time, so our bodies have ways of fixing it. So our own native DNA repair mechanisms will latch on to that piece of whole DNA we've put in, and we've broken it with CRISPR, and it essentially assembles it back together. It's a process called homologous recombination, which just means two sides that are the same, almost matching the DNA. They kind of flip into the genome. It's very hard to do without a chart. I've realized it's very hard. This is a very visual thing. There's some great, actually, there are some great videos of how it works on YouTube, and I cannot recommend them highly enough, just how CRISPR works, because they're usually like less than a minute long, really handy stuff. Another method that people use to manipulate the DNA are enzymes, special proteins that physically kind of handle the DNA and pull the two DNA strands apart. And then your new kind of piece of DNA that you've added. A lot of it still comes down to you have to add, and this is the trickiest part of it, is actually adding the new DNA to the cell. Getting that new piece of DNA in is probably the hardest and most difficult part. That's why it's usually done at the embryonic stage if you're going to do like genetic engineering of a whole organism. It's usually done at that stage. It's why gene therapies now, to kind of fix people who have genetic conditions. There are certain diseases of the eye that are caused by they're congenital. That's the genetic disease, and your vision fails. But if you put in a proper copy of that gene, you could help somebody see again. Yeah. The problem with that is delivering the DNA to the cell. How do you get it in there when it's a fully grown organism? It's easy when it's only like a little ball of cells, but when you've got a fully grown organism, it's so much harder. So I don't think I can explain this very well in very simple terms, but tiny scissors, genetic duct tape, boom, the cell does the magic kind of by itself.
I wouldn't worry too much about how bad or how well you're explaining it. We've spoken to 7 people?
7 people
who are way smarter than us, unfathomably.
Every single podcast we do, I get something blows my mind. Yeah. We've been on here like 19 minutes, and you've blown my mind like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And it's easy to blow our minds.
To be honest, I get that feeling as well on my, because I host a science podcast, and I get to talk to people who are much smarter than me, and I get to talk to companies that do crazy stuff with artificial intelligence, and they're using like machine learning and deep learning to read genomes of organisms and find out, which genes are causing disease and which ones indicate that maybe a cancer is coming. And I tell you, the technology and everything just blows my mind every time I do a podcast. So I'm with you. I understand the feeling.
We are going to be touching on that a little bit later because we posted up a status earlier in which I mentioned the fact that just the concept of your podcast blows my mind, like on its own. Mm-hmm. The idea of computer-aided biology, that to me doesn't make any sense. So we are going to get into that in a second. However, before we do, in a couple of years ago, I'm in a left-wing political party, just for context. And so in a lot of left-wing political parties, GMOs are considered to be
the devil.
The devil, yes. They're considered to be the worst things in the world. For some reason, I don't know why it's this specific thing. But I've been in favour of GMOs for years. And at every branch meeting, we do a political talk. And I wanted to try and convince a few people in my branch that GMOs could be a good thing. No matter where in the political spectrum you are, you can find things that can be good. And so I done a very, how do I say this? Simplistic talk. It was more political than scientific, but I had to put in some scientific things to try and win them over. So I talked about things like pesticide use in GMO crops and tried to explain the gene gun a little bit. Which I still don't understand fully, so I might ask you to try and explain that to me better than I explained that to them. And that was a fun experience, but I figured out about a week into the research for the talk that I was way, way over my head. And I was trying to explain a concept that was so extensive that I was just silly for trying to do it. But it was fun, and I learned a lot. And there was sort of an experience of how much work goes into being a scientist. And it sort of made me appreciate this field of science more. Hence why I spent so long looking for someone in this field. So could you possibly explain the gene gun for me?
It's a gun that fires genes, as I recall. The last time I really did anything with gene guns, because as I recall, it was for plant biology. I haven't done plant biology since my undergrad, so I'm not as up to. I don't know if anything has changed in the last 15 years. But during those days, it was basically you got these little small metal particles. Like I think gold was the particle used in the example that I'm aware of. And you can coat them in essentially genetic material, the DNA. Yeah. And like I mentioned before, you got these little matching pieces of DNA that match the genome, and DNA naturally breaks. So when you fire this gun into like a plant, say the leaf, these little particles get embedded within cells. And again, the natural DNA repair mechanism recognizes these bits of broken DNA. They match it up to the point where it's supposed to be, and they incorporate it in because they think something is broken and it needs to be fixed. That's literally those little proteins' only job is to fix DNA. Once that you give them a bit of broken DNA, they will try to fix it somewhere, as long as it matches up. If it's something that they don't recognize, then it gets destroyed usually.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the gene gun works. It's a very slapdash way of genetically manipulating a plant. At least that was my understanding of it. I could be butchering that. It has been a while since I've heard about the gene gun.
I hope you are right, because that's what I said in the talk. So if you're wrong, that means I was wrong. And
no, I'm definitely wrong.
Thanks. So at that point I was trying to explain the difference between crossbreeding, how that could be, you don't really know what you're editing, you don't know what's going to come out, you're trying to get the best genes, but sometimes it doesn't work, and that using the gene gun was more precise. Yeah. So that was the basic thing that I was going for. So I'm glad to know that I might have got some things right.
It sounds like you were on the money. I mean, I completely agree with you though, because I'm a fair. I think most scientists are. We're all fairly kind of left oriented when it comes to politics, and it has been baffling to me how the left are generally very good when it comes to science led policies. Like the climate change. It's a big left-wing agenda is like a Green New Deal. Let's get some jobs based around a bioeconomy. And that is everything that is in the philosophy of the synthetic biology / engineering biology community is building a bioeconomy. Because if you're using, carbon pumped out of the ground, it's only going to get into the air sooner or later and make the situation worse. It's already quite bad. And to be honest, because climate change is getting so out of control, we're going to have to start genetically engineering plants to survive, more floods, colder winters, hotter summers, because they're not going to evolve, and we couldn't even breed them naturally to survive that. Yeah, it's just the reality.
Again, point for me. That's another thing I said in the talk.
Well done.
Thank you.
But yeah, I don't know. My approach, though, to people who are anti-GMO is generally trying to come from their point of understanding. They're coming, like, they're taking the pro-science policies in almost a very conservative approach to the biome, to the world, and to nature. So it's kind of natural that they'd be against anything that fucks with that. Oh, can I swear on this?
Of course, yes, of course.
Oh, okay, sweet. Anything that fucks with the natural order of things. If anything, they want to dial it back to when things were, pre-nuclear bomb time. Yeah. We want to try and make the world a more natural place. The problem with more natural is that, well, we've been digging around with the biology of plants for thousands and thousands of years. If you eat a spud, or if you eat or potato, to people who don't know what a spud is, or broccoli or cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, that's one plant. That was one plant 3,000 years ago.
Oh, I have no idea about that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
It's called Brassica oleracea, I think. Wild mustard, anyway. It's still around today, but it's been bred in so many different ways that it's now 6 or 7 different things that make up, a key part of the human diet. But it, we've been selecting for things, and that applies to all of the major agricultural products. There's very few things that humans eat that haven't been bred and selected for to be bigger, to be better, to be more diverse, to give different, very specific qualities, leafier or a bigger root. It all depends on the plant. We've done the same with animals, by the way. We got chickens that are massive now. They never used to be that big. There's a great book called Big Chicken that I want to read, and mostly for the title, but I think it's also about the farming and breeding of chicken. Mm-hmm. But that's on the list.
I was going to say
nothing. Sorry,
go on you go.
No, you go on.
Okay. You said something there about obviously the mustard plant grew, and they've created it to make lots of other things. Can we genetically modify some sort of animal to make lots of different types of animals?
I think we already have.
Are you trying to breed a turducken?
Yes. The most incredible ad.
Okay, I
think I would go down a better route though, like the ancient Egyptian animal of the crocodile, lion sort of crossover. If I was going to create an animal, that would be an impressive beast.
That's what the platypus is, isn't it? Somebody's went into a lab and created the platypus, and that's the only thing that explains that animal, because that's fucking weird.
I think it's very tricky to get that level of specificity, because basically we all have the same these plants, even though they all look very different, they all have the same genome essentially. Some of them will probably have a lot more copies of other genes. They'll have duplicated a couple of times, but being able to reverse that or make a plant that's a mishmash of all of them will be very difficult, and then even more difficult for animals, because when you think of the hairs on a cat and the skin of a crocodile or something like that, they might be encoded for very similar genes or genes that play the same role, and getting the timing and the expression level of those genes at the right developmental time to result in that animal will be super tricky. I mean, I'm not going to say impossible, but I'm going to say super tricky. Maybe that's the fun project for biologists 1,000 years from now. It's like, come on, make your Sphinx. Everybody just whip it up.
I was just thinking, like, because you get like home scientists that have like their own setups and stuff like that. Yeah. What kind of level could people get to, like, in like home engineering biology? Like, what kind of level could they get to? Like,
pretty far. Have you guys seen? There's a documentary on Netflix called. I was just talking about it the other day. Unnatural Selection. It's a 4-part series of essentially on kind of genetic editing, partially from the pharmaceutical side and from the patient's point of view, and then partially just people doing it to themselves. Like, and there's a really cool company called Bento Bio, and they sell a little kit that for you, it's mostly for like teaching in schools, you know. So you got your little DNA kit, and you've got your tiny centrifuge built in, and a PCR machine. A PCR machine amplifies DNA. It's the staple technology of any molecular biology kind of work. You use it, I mean, for the COVID diagnostics. That's all PCR for the most part. You know, it's been very important. It's basically a very small kit that you can do all of this stuff from home, and it's a neat way of teaching biotechnology. And they sell a little bits of DNA to help you, like, maybe diagnose the lactose intolerance gene, you know, fun stuff like that. Okay, lactose intolerance isn't fun, but, you know, diagnosing it.
There's a guy on YouTube. There's a guy on YouTube that's actually right, okay. So he tried to do something with lactose intolerance. I think he made like some sort of dairy-free thing. I can't remember what it was, but damn, I'm going to have to. I'll check this while this podcast is going on. I'll check for what that is, because it was interesting.
It's people are going to be able to do this from home, and people are doing it from home in other ways. And in that documentary on YouTube, there was a guy who had HIV who was trying to genetically engineer himself, essentially, because there's no reason why you can't experiment on yourself, ethically speaking. It's terribly illegal to do it to anybody else, but to yourself, you can do whatever you want. And that's scary.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's equally scary, I think.
Lactose-free milk is what the guy made.
Oh, interesting.
Which is crazy. And then he made things like see-through wood. The guy does loads of like crazy stuff, man. Just because it's fun, because he enjoys doing it. But he has like a sort of small gene lab office sort of space.
What a nerd.
It's cool though. I like that stuff, man. Just
I wonder if that would fuck with the taste.
Don't know.
Not sure what lactose tastes like.
I don't know.
Brilliant, thanks.
The ending of that question there. Awesome.
Yeah, so also what... Oh, I know what I was going to ask. I've totally forgot what I was going to ask there because of that lactose-free milk thing.
Sorry.
We asked this to a virologist, but it might be more interesting asking you. No offense to the virologist. But we asked about the idea of COVID-19 being engineered by humans.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I saw there was a paper just came out that somebody showed how you could build it, which is, I mean, not design it, you know, that's a very different thing, but how you can, now knowing what the sequence is, how you can reverse build it with the parts. So building by parts of DNA is a big thing these days. It's basically Lego. Genetic engineering has now become Lego.
Nice.
You know, if you could build Lego, you could do genetic engineering these days. The concept is very similar. You use standard size parts and you stick them together and you build something completely unique and new. for building the virus and genetically engineering it, I mean, no, because why? I don't even know why anybody would. It's more practicality than anything else. It's not like you can't like design the sequence for it. Like typing out the sequence is fine, and testing it, it'd take you fucking years to develop. But there's so many easier ways to do it. Like if I wanted to wipe out mankind, I'd use a flu virus. You know, it's so much easier. Actually, note to self: wipe out mankind with a flu virus. It's tarantulas, and I'm just throwing down these ways to end the world, guys.
So, why a flu virus and not a coronavirus? What would be the main difference?
So, coronaviruses are RNA viruses. So, I mentioned DNA already, and that's the building blocks of our cell. It's the instruction for everything that builds up the individual, who they are, makes everything. RNA is this is very hard to describe suddenly. RNA in this instance, RNA is it's like the go-between. So when DNA is trying to send instructions to be built into something physical like proteins or whatever that builds up the cell, your DNA is basically just the instruction book, and it's kept in a room called the nucleus, and it can't come out. It has to stay in that room. So RNA is the messenger that kind of goes between that room with the instructions and then out to the guys who assemble everything. And the RNA goes out as a copy of the DNA in a slightly different form and says, this is what we're building. And then machinery in the cell that's also RNA based assembles it together. And and that's kind of how you get your stuff being built from DNA. RNA, however, is not designed to last forever. It is it's like a mayfly, it lives for a day and it's gone. Maybe it probably doesn't even last a day. It's just a temporary thing. It's your temporary file to get the job done. So, RNA is unstable. RNA viruses, they tend to be, like even just getting the RNA made and put in the little machinery, and coronaviruses especially are very, very tricky to grow. Because you have to infect other cells to get them to grow. Viruses can't replicate on their own. They need a host. Some viruses are better at replicating than others. And coronaviruses traditionally are not great at kind of growing in cells. This one seems to be fantastic, but that's probably not by design. I think that's just how it's naturally come about. It would be too hard to engineer, I think, a coronavirus. Maybe in the future, but not. I'm thinking about it actually quite hard, but I don't think so. But more importantly, the sequence of this coronavirus as well. It doesn't have any of the telltale markers of something that's been engineered, and that's a very tricky thing to build as well. So when you're building something up, there are certain what we call them scars in the field, but I mean. It's just these little markers, little things that scientists always use to kind of easily assemble DNA. And there's none of that. There's nothing in the coronavirus that suggests that this was man-made.
It's fun, sorry, I've got questions as well. I want some questions.
Fuck you, I want questions.
Oh my God, my brain has went blank.
I'll fucking ask my question then. What I find interesting is how differently you answered that question from how the virologist answered the question. The virologist essentially...
Did we give different answers?
Well, no. You said pretty much the same thing, that that it looks like it was impossible to make the way it is. But you also went into, I'd go with a flu.
You had an
coronavirus is a shit.
You had like an alternate sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a science communicator. I suppose I should have a story.
But what you said there is interesting, because during my time in lockdown, I read, at the beginning at least, I've kind of got a bit bored of the subject. I read a lot about coronaviruses and sort of pandemic issues as well, like the SARS thing and bird flu and swine flu and all that thing. And the thing about SARS was it just seemed to just disappear before anything like super serious came about, like what happened with this coronavirus. And the way you explained coronaviruses, it seems that that's essentially what happened, is that it just sort of died out. It just couldn't continue finding hosts. Maybe it wasn't as infectious, and it's just because it's not as good for being a pandemic, it just sort of died. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's kind of what happened with the previous SARS. I mean, they're very difficult diseases to study because they don't grow very well in host cells. The difference, I think, with this SARS, this virus, is that it seems to be a lot better at least in human cells, and it's able to infect very rapidly and grow very rapidly, which coronaviruses that are the big coronaviruses that we've seen so far haven't been able to do. Yeah.
What a pain in the dick.
I was just thinking about, like, people sort of put this thing that, like, a terrorist organisation, if they come across these things, like, where they could create viruses and stuff like that. Like, it just seems absolutely insane to me that people put this, like, evil thing in people's mind.
More the practicality. I think if people spent a week shadowing scientists in a lab who are trying to do this stuff just for research purposes, they'd realize it's so bloody hard, it's not worth the time.
Yeah. And
the cost of getting these enzymes together and assembling the thing and the cell line. And having a lab that, once you have a cell line to grow stuff in, it has to be kept super clean and super pure so it doesn't get infected with anything else. The cost, I mean, I just don't see a cave somewhere in the Middle East where someone's cooking up, these bioterrorist kind of weapons, because I just don't think you get the proper levels of sterility.
Again, because the idea is to kill as many people as you can. But, like, that serves no purpose for, like, a terrorist organisation, gangs, governments and stuff like that. It serves no purpose.
Especially when it could come back and infect you again.
It could kill anybody, because these things could pretty much kill anybody.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Yeah.
Kind of
No, I think if this was in any way specific, then maybe it would raise some suspicions, but I think it is fairly... it just seems to affect everybody. Now, it does affect people differently, certainly, but it is affecting everybody regardless of their background.
And the people that it's affecting most are old people. Like, what would China want with killing old people? What's the gain? This is the problem I had with the chemtrail conspiracy theory. It doesn't make any sense. I don't see the benefit. There's nothing there that makes me think, oh, that's a good idea.
We'll poison people, but that's it. We've no real reason for it.
Just old people. Like, nah, it's a total fucking waste of time.
Okay, so I had a question, and this is probably one of the most difficult questions. I want to talk a bit about cancer.
Jesus.
If that was okay. What would be the sort of natural steps in looking to... and again, try to watch what I'm saying, trying to figure out exactly what you would do in this situation. Can you solve this, like, in your side of science? Like, is there ways of, like, taking away certain things in the science, in the cancer cell? And, like, how would you go about trying to eradicate cancer?
You don't ask little questions here, do you?
I had it in my mind, and I was like, "How the fuck do I word this question?"
We fix world problems. That's what we do.
I was looking for. I'm not asking for the cure here. I was like, what, like, realistic steps would you feel like you would need to take in order to do it? I know it's absolutely impossible. It's not been done yet, but, like, what sort of realistic steps would you, like, logically need to think about? I'm sorry, I'm doing a terrible job at this. I'll let you answer as best you can.
I can only tell you from my own experience what I've talked to other companies about in the technology. I don't think you can genetically engineer cancer away like that. You know, it's nice that genetic engineer can help build things, but when you've got such terrible disease as cancer. No matter which version you have, it is going to be awful. And that is the trouble with cancer as well. It is not one disease. It is a disease of whatever cell has decided to replicate out of control. A liver cancer is going to be very, very different to a brain cancer. So you're dealing with different cells, and you're basically dealing with a different disease because they're going to behave somewhat differently and react to drugs differently. So what the technology is kind of leaning towards now, and it kind of goes back to one of my earlier points and the work I've been doing on my own podcast, is that leveraging new tools in software and machine learning and artificial intelligence, that area, and better detection methods, detection of DNA, those little bits of information that I mentioned. They mutate in cancer cells. That is the cause of cancer, really. It's DNA mutation. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to detect that early enough, then the treatments for cancer that we have now have a better chance of working. And that, I think, is where everything is going to start moving towards, getting, when you go to your doctor for annual checkups or whatever, and they take a little blood sample, that blood sample might be able to be screened for cancer detection markers a lot sooner than will be necessary. Instead of going to a doctor then with a symptom, it becomes a routine kind of thing because the capacity is there, the technology is there, and it's more processing the information as well. And we're getting there with the levels of computing that we have these days. And being able to run that through a machine algorithm that can kind of say, okay, there's a few mutations here. These actually line up with this form of cancer. You should go, get a proper biopsy done or get a CT scan, something that might show it up. I think that's how cancer is really going to be tackled, because preventing cancer, unless you find some way of preventing DNA mutations or whatever, but then I think we're getting down a very dangerous road, because you're basically stopping the aging of cells. Here's an ethics question for you guys. I'm going to get all podcast hosty on you two now for a second.
Awesome.
What would you feel about if genetic engineering could essentially make a human immortal, prevent aging? Then we'd all live forever.
I hate the idea of living. So this might come across as suicidal or depressive.
Because it is.
It is a little bit, yeah, but I kind of hate living. And it's
oh my God, that's worse than I thought.
I'm not done now, but I mean.
Oh, you mean you're bored already?
I'm getting bored already. And the idea of me not even being a quarter through. I'm 28 now, and if I thought I was only a quarter of the way through my life, I'd be annoyed, because that's too much. But the thought of forever, no, that's fucking no. What the fuck are you gonna do? 120 years old.
I know.
What'll I do today? The same as I've done for the past 3.
And just think about it as well, right? How opinions change and stuff as life goes on. The way we were talking about transgender issues and mental issues and stuff nowadays. Imagine if you were born 200 years ago and these sort of arguments are coming up, and you're way out with there's no chance of you keeping up with that as well. That's just
you get more conservative with age. If we live to 300, we're fucked.
Yeah, imagine. Yep. Does that blow your mind in any way?
That I hadn't actually thought about it that way. I love the cultural aspect of it. What are people going to be talking about in 200 years? And God help me if I'm alive to be there for it, because I'd be out of my depth. But even just thinking that if humans didn't die, but we kept having kids, there'd be so many of us.
Yeah.
There'd be wars over resources and stuff. So it'd be almost completely unethical to do that. But effectively, what cancer is the aging of cells. And we can stop it kind of causing a disease, take it out and excise it. But the only way to, I guess, end cancer from a genetic engineering perspective is to end aging. And that seems wrong. So I think it's really to cure all the cancers. It's going to come down to good old-fashioned detection and treatments and stuff, but I don't think genetic engineering is ever going to play a major role.
So, are you saying you can't end aging?
I think there's definitely people looking into it. That's the scary thing. I don't think the technology is there yet, but they're certainly finding the genes associated with people who live to that age of 120. You know, the ones that are probably bored out of their tree.
Yeah, exactly. Boredom. Fuck, Jesus.
Yeah.
Here's a controversial thing, and I've got shit for this. Annoyingly, from people who are not disabled. So I'm disabled. I have a thing called sacrogenesis, which means that the lowest part of my spine sort of didn't form correctly. So like the coccyx didn't develop properly, so my back's all fucked, and it's no fun. And I have a friend who's blind in one eye, and we've both agreed that if there was some sort of technology to stop people being born disabled, we would both take it, knowing fine well that a lot of people who are currently disabled now and say that they would never change it, a lot of the time say that because that is part of their character now. Whereas if they had a choice between being born with their disability, whether it be blind or deaf or whatever, or having those abilities, they would probably agree that they want those abilities. So that's a controversial opinion, that if we could get rid of disabilities, I would be in favour of that.
I think it's a case of like it's a like ethical landmine field, isn't it? It's one of those things that, I mean, what counts as a disease? That's the tricky question, because there are some like in Ireland especially, we have a lot of people with Down syndrome, and they are working in cafes and they're leading normal lives. And when they brought in this screen for Down syndrome for pregnant women, it caused a massive controversy, because it meant maybe people would get an abortion if they knew that their child would be born with Down syndrome. And it's still a very controversial topic, and I think it really comes down to people's choice in the matter. Certainly, if there was a way to cure a disease, but are certain conditions diseases, or are they more syndromes? Do you change a person? Again, it comes down to this genetic engineering and eugenics. Do you want everybody to be perfect? Do you want certain diseases cured? Do you want to, or just start fresh? And it is a very controversial topic, and I can't even claim to understand it fully. I've never been in that position to even consider it properly.
Here's a less controversial statement. If we're going to eradicate anything, it should be gingerness.
Oh, well.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Your cousin's ginger, it's fine.
Well, you've seen me already. I am just, I've got the good old-fashioned Celtic freckle gene, so I'm, yeah. I would be generally against such a thing.
You see, I love how gingers are like easy to pick on as well. Like if you'd said that about anybody else, Craig, you'd have been killed.
Yeah, I know. But that's the only reason I said it. I literally can't say it about anybody else. So I could say it about ginger people.
Do you feel like you need to get that out
Yes,
of your system sometimes?
I feel like there's a bigotry gene which I need to get rid of, and I can't use it anywhere else. So gingers, sorry gingers, but you're less human.
Cool.
I'm a piece of shit.
I can guarantee David's not covering the next podcast.
No, he's fine. It's just a joke. I'll take jokes. Jokes are fine.
Okay. All right. Do you have any more questions?
So, computer-aided computer... Hang on. Wait there. Let me restart.
I'm keeping all this in.
My bigotry's overwritten my brain right now. Computer-aided biology is a confusing statement. I don't understand what that means. Does that? I assume it means that you're using computers to enhance the technology of editing biology, but I don't know how you do that.
Essentially, yes. It's basically where good old-fashioned biology, which is, it's basically moving liquid from one pot to another. That is what biology has become. You put your liquid DNA into one pot and you get the little enzyme that does the thing in another pot, and you mix them together with a little thing that makes the reaction happen, and then you wait, and then it happens, and boom, biology. Well, molecular biology specifically, but biology can really. I'm no, I'm not going to make any apologies for this. Biologists need to realize that their job is just moving stuff from one pot to another. I did it for 10 years. I know.
Yeah, essentially chefs.
Yeah. And it's not, I don't think it's even as complicated as being a chef. So where computer-aided biology comes in, it's like saying, okay, how about instead of you taking all of that PhD and years of problem solving and, that great brain you've cultivated, and instead of using that to move liquid from one pot to another, you actually read stuff, think about new experiments, and let a robotic arm do the moving of the liquid. You just sit and do science and come up with new experiments for the robotic arm to do. And that is essentially computer-aided biology. It's kind of automating these manual processes, but also getting the data out of it and taking that data, sifting through it, interpreting it in new and exciting ways. And that's where the AI kind of machine learning stuff comes in. And that's where they can basically take when a biologist is doing experiments in the lab, there's only so much a human can measure. You might be able to look at the temperature of the room maybe as you're doing certain experiments and take as much data as possible. But if you have sensors that feed into a computer system and doing all of that for you, you can get it so much more specific. And that is really where biology needs to go. It needs to be much more like engineering, like designing the microchip, that kind of thing, but for biology. And you need to use computers and software to do that. And that's what computer-aided biology is, bringing it all together.
To me, I do a little bit of website stuff. And to me, that seems like instead of writing the code to make a website, you're using drag and drop software.
Copy and paste.
Yeah, you're sort of like taking elements from the sidebar and then putting them on the website, and that's the website made, as opposed to typing all the code for that specific element. I don't know if I've just made that a weird analogy, because you don't... I don't understand. Do you understand that?
It's not a million miles off.
Okay.
It's not a million miles off. Using kind of standard parts from like a library to fill out very specific things, that is kind of where biology is going, mostly to make it easier, more functional, and accessible, I think, as well for everybody. And of course, there are going to be biologists who can write the code, to extend your analogy, who know how to code these things and build new parts and design new things. But that doesn't necessarily have to be everybody either. Sometimes you just need enough to do your specific thing. And all of these things kind of come together in the computer-aided biology space.
That sounds cool as fuck.
Amazing, man. Amazing.
Can I just clarify as well that when I talked about the gingerness, I didn't go on this. I didn't mean do anything to current ginger people. I know some people were thinking that, but that's not what I meant. I meant stopping further gingers from being born. They would just be born with other colours of hair. That's all I meant. So we can move on for that now.
You've heard of hair dye?
Yeah, but that's rubbish. It washes out. It doesn't get rid of the problem.
The problem?
Of wig?
I'm going to stop speaking.
Oh my God.
I think there's a lot of solutions here if there's really a problem at all. But yeah, sure, let's genetically engineer all the gingers in the womb so they're never ginger again.
No, I'm saying you would have like someone in the water. I'm going to stop speaking.
You're like a whole different person to me now.
I said something that I thought was, like, not that big a deal, and then I realised I've just advocated genocide, and it's just...
Gingercide. That's what this is.
I need to walk it all back now. That's not what I meant. I just meant we need more people with, like, black and brown and blonde hair and whatever.
You sound like a ginger-hating Hitler type. God.
You're Scottish. How is this allowed? Are you ginger? What? I haven't seen you.
Do you not like kilts and haggis?
No, they're really... Well, first of all, the best haggis is from a tin. It's not the real stuff.
Oh,
it's genetically engineered haggis is what I eat.
No.
And I've got black hair, so I'm allowed to live.
Now I think you should be eradicated.
You're right, I agree.
Personally.
Especially if we're going to live forever. Just kill me now.
Okay, so I really hate it that
podcast.
That this is the way the podcast is ending. But sometimes these things happen. Thank you for joining us, David. Much appreciated.
Do you have anything you would like to promote before you go?
I think I've mentioned my podcast already, but I do want to promote just one little piece of knowledge, which is for all the people who feel like GMOs are the devil. You're allowed to have that opinion and talk to scientists about it, because we're not going to try and convert you, but just be open. We do understand that you want something natural, but you got to listen to the scientists too, because we do listen to you. We really do. That's all I'm going to say on that.
There you go.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on, David. It's been awesome.
It's been a lot of fun, guys. Thanks a million.
Definitely, man. Definitely.
I've enjoyed myself. That's all I can say.